Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us for this webinar. As you may know, this is one webinar in a series of webinars called Career Month. For 4 weeks, we are providing webinars and events for students to prepare them for the job hunt. Today, we'll be going over how to prepare for an interview with Matt Perkins, who is a content developer with Udacity's Career Services. He'll be sharing about the 4 types of interviews you will encounter during the job search and how to prepare for each. After his presentation, Matt and I will go through a few different role-playing scenarios to highlight interview do's and don'ts. With that, we'll dive right in, and I will pass the mic over to Matt.
Thank you, Kelsey, and hello, everybody. Welcome to Udacity's Preparing for an Interview webinar. I'm Matt Perkins, and I'll be taking you through the important task of preparing for an interview. So let's go ahead and get that started. All right, so I'm very excited to be able to give you some tips and advice on this crucial phase of your job search. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the most nerve-wracking parts of the job search, the interview process, can be quite daunting. What we're going to cover today is providing a brief introduction to the different phases of the interview process in order to explain each section's purpose and goal, pitfalls to identify and avoid while interviewing, and teaching you some interview resiliency so you can bounce back after a misstep and ultimately ace your interview. Depending on the job and company you're interviewing with, the interview process can change significantly. While we can't cover all aspects of each type of interview during this webinar, what we will give you is a breakdown of typical interview process and what the purpose, goal, and common pitfalls are during each phase. So, since we covered technical interviews earlier in Careers Month programming, we provided the link to that webinar in the description section of this video as a reference to help you prepare for all of your interviews, including the technical interviews. Kelsey and I are also going to role play a few common interviewing mistakes and how you can bounce back from these mistakes during an interview. Finally, we'll open up the floor so you can ask the questions you have regarding interview prep. All right, let's get started with a brief description of the interview process. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, the interview process can change quite a bit from company to company, position to position, business unit to business unit. In order to cover as much detail as possible, we've decided to go with the basic process that will highlight the important general aspects involved with any interview process. The quote-unquote standard interview process can be broken down to its main elements of a phone or interview with a screener, followed by a skills check and group panel interview, with a final interview that typically involves the job offer and compensation discussions. Remember though, depending on the role that you're interviewing for, there can be many more interviews involved in the process, such as panel interviews, technical interviews, whiteboard and presentation interviews, and behavioral interviews. Don't get too worried about these different types of interviews just yet. We'll try to add in some additional information on these types as we go along. Let's take a look at the phone or screening interview. Typically, the normal interview process starts off with a phone call from the company's human resources department that will go over specific portions of the job description, such as required skills or experiences. Some of these calls also include position-specific questions designed to test your knowledge of the basics of what the job entails. Hiring managers often send canned questions to the HR recruiter, who then calls you in an attempt to make sure you know the basics of the position before committing to an interview that uses up company resources. Basically, they want to know that you aren't wasting time on someone unqualified for the job. So the purpose of the phone interview is twofold. First, the company wants to know that you possess some basic knowledge for the position to which you're applying. Second, the HR person talking with you wants to be able to get your availability for either an in-person interview or a virtual interview in case you're located remotely. What your goals for this interview should be is to make the best first impression that you can. Answer the questions given to you clearly and honestly, and provide the caller with as much availability as possible in order for them to fit you into the interviewing schedule. Now, the most common pitfall for this particular interview is for them to not be taken as seriously as they should be. Yes, this is a phone interview, and you might think you don't need to be worried about it as much as other interviews. However, this is your very first contact with a potential future employer, and your first impression here can either make or break a decision to keep interviewing you. Show your interest in the company and that you're eager to learn more. Help yourself stand out from competition by sharing a few things about yourself that will show you as a quality candidate they need to speak with further. Finally, make sure to always ask about follow-up or timelines during this interview. You should never end any conversation without asking for the next interview or not being told what to expect further in this interview process. So now that we covered the first step, let's move on to the skills check interview. The first face-to-face interview is an extremely important step for both you and the person interviewing you. The person interviewing you has to set aside time in their busy schedule of both their day-to-day work and in their hiring process to find out if you could be their next colleague. You also have to not just make a good enough impression on your interviewer to pass this interview, you also need to get them to want to give you another interview as well. The purpose of this first interview, whether face-to-face or not, is to typically get you in front of the hiring manager so they can see that you have all of the skills and requirements to perform this job. They will be testing your general knowledge, experience, and expertise, and beginning to look at what more you can bring into the organization. If you're a software development or self-driving car engineer nanodegree program graduate, or have experience in a technical background, you might be given a whiteboarding or coding interview where you have to demonstrate your coding abilities. If you're a digital marketing nanodegree program graduate or similar, you might have to do a presentation interview where you have to demonstrate your presentation skills. You might also be tested to show your knowledge of the company, products, and values. In some cases, you may be asked questions that are designed to see how you would respond to certain situations or hardships that might challenge you in the position. Finally, the interviewer will want you to ask relevant questions in order to assess your grasp of this role, their organization, or your enthusiasm to join their team. Your goal during this interview is to show the interviewer that you have a solid understanding of and capability to perform the tasks associated with this position. In addition, you might want to have done enough research into the company and position to be able to explain how you would bring your talents, skills, and ideas and use them to not just fill this position, but to add value to the organization as well. And again, make yourself available for any follow-on interviews. The biggest pitfalls with this interviewing phase is not having any or enough questions prepared in advance. Additionally, not having done enough research about the company, values, culture, industry, or future that are linked to this position will not only impede your ability to ask hard-hitting and relevant follow-up questions, it will also erode your confidence and possibly lead to making mistakes or not convincing your interviewer of your enthusiasm and commitment to this role. The best advice I can give for this phase of interview is that you can never be too prepared. Research everything you can about all aspects of the role, the company direction, and culture so you can make yourself stand out as an exceptional candidate with great potential. Thank the interviewer for their time and willingness to speak with you. And as always, ask how you can keep this hiring process moving forward or when they'd like to speak with you further. Now, we're going to cover the group panel phase of the interview process. The group panel is an extremely important step in the interview process as it not only goes into even greater detail into your experience and skill, This interview is also it tries to determine whether or not you'd be a good fit for the organization and its culture. This interview can be conducted in multiple different ways. The first way is to have you interview with a hiring panel made up of different stakeholders for the positions in question. The questions for this battery-style interview can range from more information about your experience, behavioral-based scenario questions, to determining your ability to adapt and integrate into the company culture and its working style. The members that make up an interview panel can vary depending on the focus of the interview and the organization. However, the general makeup of a panel consists of a human resources representative, the hiring manager, possibly a direct supervisor if that person is not the hiring manager, and a peer or coworker with experience and responsibilities related to the position. The other way to run this interview is by using one-on-one interviews with senior level stakeholders, which, depending on the company, could include vice president or executive level interviewers. This interview can also be conducted remotely as either a one-on-one or panel style interview as well. The purpose of this interview can best be described as the company trying to determine if you would be a good addition to the culture and structure of the company. The interviewer will also be trying to judge how you would respond to different situations by asking how you've encountered or resolved workplace issues in the past. One common question posed by an interviewer is asking about not just a success in your past, but more importantly, a failure in your past and how you overcame it. Your goals during this phase are not just to know your potential positional responsibilities. You also want to show your insight and demeanor would be great additions to the company as a whole. You want to convey to the interviewer that not only are you a good fit as far as culture, values, and work is concerned, you also bring greater potential to the success of their business by contributing your experience and strengths to the team. This is the time to capitalize on all of the extra skills you've learned throughout your career. Talk about hands-on experience you've gained through volunteer work or during the projects you've worked on throughout your nanodegree program. Emphasize teamwork, conflict resolution, and other soft skills to show how you can be a great team player. Make sure you give examples of these traits pulled from your experience. Tell them how you've successfully dealt with interpersonal situations in the past and have implemented these solutions moving forward. Don't be afraid to admit failure. Mistakes and failures are the best teachers and motivators. Show how you've been challenged in the past and overcome those challenges to become better, smarter, and stronger as a professional. No one is perfect, and interviewers aren't expecting a candidate to be perfect. What they want to see is that you can adapt and overcome and are willing to learn from your mistakes. Okay, so let's look at the final interview. The final interview, you're totally getting that job now, right? Be careful when approaching your final interview. Things aren't set in stone just because they want to talk to you again. Doesn't automatically guarantee you're going to get a job. The purpose of the final interview is to meet with you one last time before the hiring decision is made. The interviewer will want to ask for clarification on some of your answers that might not have been totally clear. Additionally, they'll want to see that you fully understand the position, company, and team that you will be joining. If all goes well, there may or may not be a job offer made to you. Don't be upset or worried if an offer isn't made to you on the spot. Sometimes the company will want to extend a formal offer outside of an interview event. Regardless of what happens, stay professional, stay confident, and stay engaged. For you, this is the time to be confident and elaborate on your previous interview's answers, or strengthen up weak or incorrect answers you may have given in previous interviews. Play up your strengths as a candidate and know how you are the best fit for the job. Don't assume they know. Sell yourself and your potential to them. Overconfidence is the biggest pitfall for this phase of the interview process. Just because they called you doesn't mean you're a shoo-in for the job. They might be trying to decide between you and another candidate, and it's a close call. So their impression of you could be the deciding factor to whether or not you get the job. Okay, so the next part of the webinar is where Kelsey and I will present a couple of common mistakes made during interviews and how you can bounce back and still conquer your interview with confidence. All right, so for our first scenario, I'll ask Kelsey a basic question that you'll probably encounter at least once during your interview. Let's see how she responds. Hi, Kelsey. Tell me a bit about yourself and why you're interested in joining us here at Udacity.
Hi, Kelsey, and I am interested in a community manager position. I am from San Francisco, and I've been looking for a job for a while.
So, Kelsey's response was a little underwhelming and lacked clear sense of purpose. Kelsey's answer didn't provide any new information to her interviewer that he didn't already gather through her application. What she should have done was use her elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is a 2 to 3 sentence paragraph that sums up your experience and passion and leads the person hearing it to want to know more about you. Let's take a look at a way Kelsey could have interviewed the answer, could have answered that will provide a more focused and purposeful answer to her interviewer.
My name is Kelsey Miller, and I just returned from a 6-month hike of the Pacific Crest Trail where I experienced the power of community. I moved to the Bay Area 4 years ago to serve as an AmeriCorps member at a local nonprofit, organizing corporate service events and managing volunteers. After my term, I went on to work for Airbnb as a community organizer while maintaining my interest in social good by organizing company-wide volunteer events. I hope to blend my two passions of community engagement and corporate social good as a community manager for Udacity's scholarships team.
With this answer, Kelsey not only provided some insight into her professional background, she also clearly detailed her motivations for applying to this new position. Using your elevator pitch will save you time and worry by giving you a solid and familiar platform for you to use to show your exceptional qualifications as a candidate. We're going to show you another type of question that can trip up your interview. So this next scenario is a common problem during an interview, not knowing the answer to a question. Let's take a look at how Kelsey responds. So, how would you go about identifying, sorting, and using existing customer databases in order to maximize the results of my advertising campaign?
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know, or I'm not sure, is a very abrupt stop to any momentum built up during an interview. It's okay if you don't know something, but make sure you add that you'll find out a clear answer. What's more, use a pivot statement that will help you bounce back from this awkward question. Let's see how Kelsey can use this I don't know situation and turn it around to help her highlight some of her experience and skill sets.
I know that you can break down your customer base for marketing purposes, but I have to look into how to use that specifically for marketing purposes. However, I have done targeted community campaigns in my previous position and have some experience identifying, sorting, and using my existing customer database.
With a little bit of thought, you can turn an I don't know into an I have a similar experience moment. This will keep you from just saying I don't know and help you maneuver on in your interview. All right, so let's take a look at our last example. Our last scenario can significantly impact your interview process, admitting failure. It's common for interviewers to ask behavioral questions to see how you'd respond under stress and handle difficult problems. One very common question is asking about failures in your past. Let's see how Kelsey handles this situation. So, can you tell me of a time where you might have made a mistake or had a disagreement with a coworker and how you resolved the problem?
Totally. This one time, I was trying to finish up a project and my coworker was on vacation, so she totally made me miss the deadline for our new product launch.
All right, so Kelsey's response to the situation stated the problem, but it didn't show how she learned from the experience. Like Kelsey, you have to remember the tone you set with what you say. Instead of focusing on the coworker, Kelsey should have focused on the objective cause of failure, which is time management. This is a way Kelsey could have responded that would better demonstrate her ability to learn and grow as a potential team member.
I remember one time when I missed the new product launch deadline due to a coworker being on vacation. I realized afterwards that had I planned ahead and managed my time more effectively, I could have avoided the problem by getting what I needed from my coworker before she left for vacation instead of last minute.
Focusing on the problem and how you learn from it will show your interview your integrity, your honesty, and ability to self-critique. Use your past failures as opportunities to grow and develop professionally. Okay, so let's review our scenarios real quick and then we'll get to answering your questions. All right, so the first scenario showed Kelsey having difficulty with her introduction. The reason this happened was because Kelsey didn't have her elevator pitch prepared to help her structure her introduction. However, in her second response, Kelsey used her pitch, made a good impression, and set the tone for the rest of her interview. If you're in the middle of your introduction and realize you strayed from your pitch, don't worry. Just steer the rest of your introduction back to your pitch and you can recover from this mistake. Our second scenario shows Kelsey in a situation that's common to many people, interviewing for a job, which is not knowing an answer. The main two causes of this problem are either you didn't prepare well enough prior to your interview or that you don't have the experience. If you don't know the exact answer to an interview question, you haven't failed. You can tell the interviewer that you can find out the answer and how you'd go about finding out the answer. This response will show the interviewer that you are serious about this position's responsibilities and are willing to learn. The other way to respond, which is especially helpful to career changers, is to relate the experience in question to something that you do have experience with. This will show your adaptability and additional skills that might not have come up before. In our last scenario, we covered how to use your past failures to overcome difficult questions during your interview process. Kelsey was asked to give an example of a past mistake and how she resolved it. While her first answer focused on excusing her actions, Kelsey was able to effectively overcome this question with her second answer. Kelsey was able to identify a past mistake, identify why it happened, and demonstrate how she used that experience to help shape her future actions. Now that we covered the interview process's purpose, goals, pitfalls, and shown you some common scenarios to help you bounce back from mistakes during the interview, I want to hear from you and answer your questions. But first, I wanted to remind everyone of tomorrow's Career Month's webinar. Martin McGovern, one of Udacity's career coaches, will be going over how to follow up after your interview. We'll post details and links in the description and comments, but you don't want to miss out on this great opportunity. Okay, let's hand this back over to Kelsey so we can get to answering your questions.
Great, thanks, Matt. All right, so we are going to go to the pre-submitted questions. So students had the opportunity to send in questions for Matt ahead of time. So we'll review those first, and then we will move on to live questions. So if you have questions for Matt, please put them in the chat so Matt can get to them. The first question we have for you is, there's so much that can be asked in a technical, non-technical interview. How can I make sure I'm prepared?
So that is a very good question. I look at preparing for an interview especially when you're talking about it, both a technical and non-technical interview. I look at it kind of like preparing for your SATs or your college entrance exams. You don't want to cram everything in at the last moment. What you want to do is you want to start prepping early. So basically, you want to break up your review and your study into bite-sized chunks that you can go over relatively quickly and be able to continually refresh your skills and your knowledge. That's especially helpful in technical interviews. Make flashcards so you can quick review, essentially like you would if you were learning a new language, or back when you were in grade school and you're learning, multiplication and all that. So just prepare early and practice often. Now, on the non-technical side, the best thing that you can do to prepare for your interview is understand the purpose and the goals for each specific interview. Practice the answers to possible questions. So, like, can you tell me whatever? Can you tell me how to, program a computer? Or, can you think of a time when, kind of like what we asked Kelsey, can you think of a time when you might have had a disagreement with your coworker and how you resolved it? That type of thing. So go through all of these potential questions, and I probably look like a crazy person when I prepare for interviews, because I'm constantly, well, not talking to myself, hopefully, but going through it in my head. So I'm constantly asking myself questions, and I'm constantly thinking of how I'm going to answer these questions. So that way, when and if I get those, I can easily and smoothly be able to answer the question and lead it into furthering the interview.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. And now for another pre-submitted question. Is there a way to bring up availability, part-time versus full-time, and disabilities during the interview in a way that won't disqualify me as a candidate?
So this is a very, very great question that's actually near and dear to my heart. So to start off, when you're discussing, availability, part-time, full-time, that normally is addressed during, like, when you're applying or when you're in the phone screening interview. If it's not clear it up as early as possible. That way it's less of an issue on down the road. Now, when it comes to disabilities, the disability is yours. You get to decide whether or not you want to discuss it. Personally, I have disabilities from my time in service. I don't normally bring them up, but if I decide to bring them up, then what I do is I focus on my strengths and my abilities and not on my disabilities. So if they're very serious about hiring you and you show them how you'd be a great fit and how you could fill the role perfectly, then they would be more willing to offer flexibility, such as maybe work from home or some flex time, or setting your work hours or your busy hours to more easily help you out with your disability. So those are the that's what I would recommend when you're interviewing.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for sharing your personal story too. I think that was a really good question. So now we're going to move on to the live questions from the chat. How can we get interviews if we are changing fields? My background is in a field unrelated to my new career.
Well, I hate to always say that I feel your pain, but I have felt your pain. Changing career fields is a very challenging time. It is not the easiest time in the world, but just like I would recommend for pretty much anybody, whether you're changing career field or not, it comes down to your confidence and your preparedness. So you have to be confident in the skills that you have. And the good thing about the skills that you learn with Udacity is You already have hands-on experience. You've already completed projects in your nanodegree program. So the imposter syndrome that you would normally get, saying, oh, I don't have any experience, I don't know how I'm going to get this job, you don't have that. Well, you shouldn't have that experience because you already have skills. When it comes to when you get into the interviews and they're asking about your previous experience, the best way to approach that is, like I mentioned earlier, take your experiences that you do have and the skills that you have learned and find a way to bring them together. The best thing about interviewing across careers is the fact that you have your soft skills. Okay, so people skills, time management, conflict resolution, all of those soft skills, you've got those already. You've already been employed. It's not like you're coming straight out of college. So capitalize on those soft skills, and then show that you have, the technical skills to back them up for your training.
Thanks, Matt. I think that's a great answer. And this might be a hard one for you to answer, but I think you might be able to weigh in some capacity. I know you said during your presentation, never say, I don't know. And a student asked if they have a technical question they can't answer. Do you have any recommendations on how to proceed if they really can't answer the technical question, what they could do to recover?
That is a very good question, and one that doesn't have a very clear, simple answer. Depending on the situation, I mean, if I'm asked to, hey, can I run SQL query? I can kind of stumble through it, but I don't really have that knowledge. So if I were to be in an interview that says, hey, do this, or what's the answer to a technical issue, and I don't know, then I actually don't know. But my opinion on the matter is that do your best not to give them a bad answer or straight up tell them I don't know. What you do want to show at that point is, okay, I don't know this answer, but I will find the answer and I will give you the answer. Or, hey, this is how I would go about giving you the answer. That at least shows your level of commitment and your ability, your willingness, I should say, to learn and to actually be serious about the position you're interviewing for. And also, I mean, it will get you through that eventually get you through that awkwardness. So hopefully you can keep going in the interview, and that's something you can come back later in another interview and follow up on.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think whether it's a behavioral question or a technical question, you being able to show what you do know about it and be willing to say, I'll do the work to figure it out. I think that's valuable regardless of what kind of question it is. My next question for you that came in from the chat is, do you have any tips on how to stay calm during an interview? This person says, I get so nervous the day before an interview, I get physically sick.
I sweat a lot personally when I get nervous, so I'm constantly like shaking my hands or trying to dry them off of my pants. We actually, so you can take Matt Perkins's tips, but we actually, Kelsey, don't we have an upcoming webinar on relaxing before an interview?
Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned it. Thank you, Matt. We had it last night, but it is still up live, and I'll post the link in the chat. It was with Nico Rose, who's the VP of Talent Acquisition at Bertelsmann, and he is a psychologist. And so he went over tips on how to prepare psychologically for an interview. And I watched it, obviously, last night. It was wonderful. He had some really interesting things to say. So I will post that in the chat as well, so students can go back and view it.
And I'll leave that as an answer, but honestly, for me, the biggest thing is confidence. The old, salesman adage of "fake it till you make it," it does have a little bit of weight. So you have experience, you have skills, and rely on that. Be confident in them. That's my take. Sorry.
Yeah, that's great. All right, on to the next live question. Again, students, if you have any questions for Matt, just drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. Can we answer an interview question with an experience that was not in the current field we're in?
Absolutely. I would actually encourage it, because you already have the experience. You already, well, hopefully have learned something from that experience, and you can use that to segue into how you would, basically what your behaviors would be in this new field. A lot of, like I've mentioned earlier, a lot of it is less about you being perfect and more about you being willing. So absolutely use your prior experience and do your best to relate it to the position you're interviewing for. The best way to actually prepare to do that is what are the hypothetical questions that you're going to be asked, and go through your resume, go through your experience, and say, okay, so they might ask about this. I'm going to answer it with this. You don't have to have memorized answers, but knowing what you're going to point back to, what experience you're going to point back to, reduces the amount of time or the amount of worry involved with, well, how can I make this fit? You should already have a fairly good idea of what story you're going to tell, what skills you're going to say. Hey, this is what I learned and this is what I can bring. So basically, the earlier you can prepare, the better you're going to be off. The better off you're going to be.
And I'm just tacking this onto the question. What about experiences that are not professional? So maybe you got asked a behavioral question. Can you reference personal experience? The Pacific Crest Trail is a good one for me. Something like that. That isn't necessarily my career, but is something that could be relevant.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was actually pulling up that specific part of what we went over. So now, it's not a professional experience, but it is skills that Kelsey learned, and I want to parse it out a little bit to show you how beneficial it is to bring up non-professional experience. So according to Kelsey's answer, she was out for a 6-month hike on Pacific Crest Trail, and then 4 years as AmeriCorps, and organizing and managing events and volunteers. That is absolutely nothing to do professionally, right? That's all personal volunteer work. But she did it for 4.5 years. Granted, it wasn't her paying job, but what kind of dedication does that show? So you can talk about, hey, you know what, I was committed to do this 6-month hike. That's, in my opinion, that's crazy talk, but she's dedicated to the 6-month hike. So that shows that shows commitment. Talk about community. Imagine what kind of bonding goes on in a 6-month hike, and being able to manage that, being able to relate, interpersonal skills. That's 6 months of interpersonal skills, that pretty intense interpersonal skills. So you can actually make each non-professional event fit multiple, like tie it back in multiple different ways back to how that would benefit you professionally. Plus, it also shows passion, and that's how you tie your work and your passion together is, hey, I've already done this on my own time. Now let me put it to work for you.
I think that's a great thing to hit on for students who are career changers or have had a gap in their work history, just because sometimes that feels like it's a vulnerability or something that a company might not be attracted to, or you might not get the job because of it. And I think that there are ways to frame your story to show that your time off or your different career is relevant, and you can bring those skills to this new job. So I think that was a good answer. My next question for you from the chat is, how can you manage questions about your salary expectation, assuming that you don't have a job right now? So you would like a fair salary, but you don't want to miss the opportunity maybe to get a higher salary because of that. So you're kind of on, like balancing between not wanting to ask for too much, but also you want to make sure you're getting a good offer.
Yeah, no, that's a very, everybody deals with that, whether you're employed or not, whether you're currently employed and looking or you're not employed and looking, everybody wants to make sure that, they're valued, that they're paid what they're worth, and that they'll be comfortable and, not be feeling the financial pinch in changing your job. The best suggestion from my own experience that I could give you is do the research. Go out there. The internet's a fantastic thing in the sense that there are so many employee reviews, corporate reviews. Look at publications like Forbes or any like Entrepreneur magazine, and you'll find information about these companies that A, give you an idea of what they do pay, B, can give you an idea of what their employees say as far as compensation and benefits are concerned. Also, you can go out and look at sites like Glassdoor or Indeed or even LinkedIn, and there's a wealth of information out there, not just to find out what your industry talent is worth, but also start looking at what previous people in those positional titles earned at that company. I know moving across country, when I got hired with Udacity, I was having to worry about cost of living differences, all sorts of things, cost of living, inflation, everything. And honestly, you cannot, reiterating what I said earlier, you cannot prepare enough. And when it comes to talking about salary and benefits, that research will basically that's what drives your conversation, because you already have the tools, you already have, your arsenal's loaded, and you're not going in there with your hat in your hand. And, hopefully, they're dealing with you fairly, and you'll have a good idea of what you're going to walk away with.
I think that's good advice, Matt. And I'll put another plug in for a webinar coming up next week on the 20th at 7 p.m. We're going to be talking to a recruiter here at Udacity about how to negotiate your offer, and that includes your salary and your other benefits and your equity, all the things that are a little nerve-wracking to deal with once you finally get to that last interview. She's a wealth of knowledge, and I am really excited about that webinar. So that's another great place to tune in if you want more information about negotiating your offer. So we've got another question. I am a student now, and so I don't have a lot of, not me, but the student doesn't have a lot of experience quite yet. and they'd like to know how to present that in an interview. So they don't have any professional experience, they just graduated. How can you use that academic experience in that professional interview setting?
Okay, so just like we talked about earlier with Kelsey and her volunteer work and how you can use the non-professional experience, that's you want to capitalize heavily on the skills that you possess. If you don't have the experience, it's a little challenging to sit there and say, you know, I'm perfectly capable at this job. But what you can do is rest on your academics. So we had a resume workshop last week, and one of the things we went over is listing basically your educational experience. You know, if you're light on job experience, and the important thing, no matter what schooling it is, list your relevant courses to that position. Okay, and if you need to, go ahead and explain more in more detail how those classes or how those projects will relate, you know, to your job. Now, one benefit as a nano degree program student is the classroom experience that you get through Udacity. The projects give you the skills or teach you the skills that you need for the job, but they also give you the hands-on experience in applying those skills to, you know, something more than just I know how to do task A, I know how to do task B. They actually take you through and you get to experience the, you know, basically the holistic view of these skills. So as a Udacity student, capitalize on those projects. The fantastic thing about those projects is, yes, you can list them as part of your education, but also list them in your resume or bring them up in your interview as, hey, you know, you can basically you explain them out experientially, as opposed to just listing an academic class. So you actually have the experience. You can apply that to the job. You can say that you've got it and move on from there. Your goal.
Thanks, Matt. It's interesting to have these questions come in because it's clear that students are in all different types of places in their lives. Some are just graduating from college, and others are older and changing in their career. So our next question is, how do you deal with being older and entering the tech field, especially in interviews? I think sometimes it can feel like there is age discrimination, or it's harder to have opportunities if you're older. And is there any way to deal with that in an interview, and any recommendations or suggestions you have for students that feel that way?
So first off, you're not older, you're more experienced. So that's a good thing. Yes, the tech field is younger. On average, I guess, when you look at statistics, but you have skills that the younger, I guess your younger coworkers or potential coworkers don't have. You might have learned your technical skills later in life. That doesn't mean you learn it less than your younger compatriots. That just means, you know, you got it later. Capitalize on those soft skill experiences that you can bring from your previous, I guess, your previous career. Capitalize on those, and then toss your skill in, like the skills that you have learned, toss those in on top of those, and you'll actually have a leg up. The good thing about employers is that while it doesn't make as much sense to me to, why would they hire me over a younger person? But when it comes down to maturity, not age-wise, but psychologically, and emotional maturity, you've already shown that you're employable. That's half of it. They know that you're going to show up to work. They know that you're going to do your work, and they know that you're going to grow. So if you capitalize on those, you shouldn't have a problem. You shouldn't run into a huge problem when it comes to age.
Thanks, Matt. That was helpful. And I think it can, as our chat moderators pointed out, it can go both ways, both for younger and older. And it's, I think that was a good answer. Thanks, Matt. That is the last of our live questions. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. We're almost to 5 o'clock PST. We have students from all over. Thank you so much, Matt, for taking the time out of your day to talk to us. I think you had some really interesting insights, and I hope students walk away with a better understanding of the interview process and how to prepare for that process and what the goals of the company are when they're going through those 4 interviews. I thought that was a really interesting perspective and structure for the webinar, so thank you. And for everyone here, thank you so much for joining and, again, taking time out of your day to be a part of this. As I mentioned, this is a series of webinars called Career Month. This week we are talking specifically about the interview process, and next week we're talking about what to do after you get the job. So please join us for our next webinar, which Matt mentioned. It's following up after an interview. So what do you do when the interview is over? How do you follow up with the person you spoke to? How to leave a good impression? Martin McGovern, who you have probably seen in the chat, will be hosting that webinar, and we're excited to have him. He will be talking at 4 p.m. tomorrow, 4 p.m. PST tomorrow, September 13th. And we will, again, share the link in the description as well as the chat. Thank you again for everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.